You're listening to the Fezcast, the Saracens fans podcast, bringing you the independent and unhinged views of the voices in our heads, as well as those of our special guests. To get in touch with us, find the Fezcast on social media and listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube and more. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy this week's show.
You're listening to the Fezcast.
Hello everybody and welcome to episode 5 of season 6. I'm here with Jez and Sam and Alex, struggling through a terrible attack of man flu, so if I talk more rubbish than usual, you know the reason. And here we are, Jez. First real week of the season for the men, and we're top of the league and top of the world.
Looking down on creation, as it were. We were discussing our love of the Carpenters before we came on air, and yeah, what a fantastic weekend. As I say, Carlsberg don't do rugby weekends, do they? But if they did, it wouldn't be far off this one, would it?
No, stop the season now. We'll talk about both of the games, the important games at the weekend. But first, I think worth just looking back to last week's episode. And first of all, congratulations on the conversation with Mark McCall. Big thank you to him for coming on the show. I think we were feeling a little bit grumpy about the amount of love we were getting from the club, but I don't think we can complain now, can we?
No, and thank you to Ollie Shapley as well for, it took a bit of battering to get there, but we got there in the end. This has been probably 9 months in the gestation period, and finally we gave birth to the interview. But yeah, fantastic of Mark to give us his time at StoneX. It was great going down and watching the team go through their paces as well. Got a chat with a few of the lads as well. Dan Vickers, had a bit of a chat with him. Alex Lazowski, good news there as well, looking like he's coming back from injury, hopefully fairly soon. But yeah, it was great to speak to all of them. But yeah, in particular, Mark McCall. I think we got a little bit more out of him than he normally gives in interviews, but they basically ask him the same question, which is at the moment is about Owen Farrell. So we tried to, we couldn't not mention Owen, obviously, but I think Mark was very keen to perhaps downplay a little bit of Owen returning. But then, we're going to talk about Owen in relation to the game on Friday night, aren't we? So, I mean, it's one of those things you can't get away from it. But he was very keen to talk about all of the players and how it was very much a ongoing journey that the lads are going on and bringing through these youngsters who've got an awful lot of talent. And again, we'll be talking about one of those players in particular, won't we, on the weekend?
Yeah, I wonder whether it's because he's bored about talking with Owen Farrell, but probably, Sam, more likely that he wants to spread it around and doesn't want Owen to detract, especially from the progress of Fergus Burke and, all of the fly halves.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, look, you can't get away from, Fazmania, whatever you want to call it. But I think also we've spoken about this when he left. We said he wasn't the player he used to be. And part of that was down to potentially a little bit of mental health with what went on at the World Cup and all that kind of stuff, very publicly explaining that to the world, which was actually quite brave of him to do. And then a tough season at Racing. Potentially, I think Mark McCall's also protecting Owen Farrell a little bit from being hyped up a bit too much. Of course, look, we've got two amazing talents in Burke and Johnson that I'm excited to see their progress alongside Farrell. But I think there's maybe an element of a little bit of protection of him as well. No one told the marketing team at Saracens that because they've literally posted about 917 pictures of him since he returned. But I think there's an element of that from McCall. He's an excellent man manager and he protected players, and I think that's what he's doing a bit here.
I think we'll have a little to touch on the marketing department a bit later on as well, because it's interesting what's going on there. But one of the big pluses for me, Alex, was when Jez asked Mark about his motivation. It was the joy of going in every day to work with such a great group of people. And he won't be able to do that if he's an international manager, will he? So hopefully we've got him for a while.
Yeah, I think you see that a lot with Saracens, where coaches actually stay for a long period of time and, players stick around even after they've retired, like Alex who come back doing his coaching role. So actually you see that, and you don't get that at a lot of clubs. Kind of people coach there for a few years, they move on, they want to go do, international work, or they want to go work at a bigger, better club. So I think that's something really special about Saracens.
I wonder whether Alex Osterbreel will have the bug for international rugby now that he's been with Canada through this World Cup, because he probably went to build up the relationship with the Canadian Sarries players, get a few more signed probably, but it must be tempting after an experience like that.
It's different in the women's game because Canada aren't a professional setup. They can't employ loads of full-time coaches. But I think definitely for Alex, it was a good opportunity, and it was good to see him work with the Saracens Canadian girls. You know, we've got 9 of them in that squad that actually hopefully will smooth the transition when they come back to playing for club.
Absolutely. So shall we go in chronological order or time order and talk about Saracens versus Newcastle first? I think both Barry and I had butterflies about the game as it started, a sold-out ground, a lot of enthusiasm there, new players coming in for Newcastle. They scored a really good opening try, and then Nathan Mikulov got a 20-minute red card. It was a feeling for me, Sam, that was history against us? Was it going to be a historic night?
Bone. This is exactly what I was thinking. I was like, here we go. And I think when I listened back to I watched back the post match highlights again, the commentator actually said that it was potentially a bit of a banana skin game with everything that you just mentioned, with the new sponsorship and ownership and all that sort of stuff. Massive banana skin with it being first game of the season. And do you know what? I think with the first 5 minutes or so, what happened, I think it just actually, you have to give even more praise to the team for how they were able to turn around and the physicality that they brought. It really was a Saracens of old. But yes, to answer your question, I was, pooing myself a little bit after the first couple of minutes. And I wasn't wearing my lucky shirt. And I was going to blame myself for not wearing my lucky shirt.
I thought you were going to say you weren't wearing your lucky underpants.
No, I definitely didn't want to be doing that.
In the end, though, Jez, I'm not sure what it taught us. I mean, we beat Newcastle Falcons, as they were, pretty well at the end of last season. I know we had that terrible game up there last year, but at the end of the season, we gave them a right old spanking. They haven't really had the time or the quality of player available to bring in. So I'm not sure whether they're much better than they were last season. So did it teach us much?
Well, I think it did, in so much as, look, first point is you can only beat what's put in front of you. And Saracens did that. After going behind, after going down to 14 men for 20 minutes, I was quite critical of Nathan at the time in the heat of the moment. I've tempered that slightly. I mean, it's, it's one of those things happens. And actually, we'll talk about Hannah Bottom's yellow card, which was probably more serious than Nathan's, in so much as there were players involved in it. But what it showed was that we got some organisation, which perhaps we didn't have at times last season. And we had a period of time, we went down to 14 men and won that period 8-0. You can't argue at that. And that doesn't matter. Bath would struggle to do that. Leicester would struggle to do that. Bristol would struggle to do that. Going down to 14 men like that showed some organisation in defence, number one, but also some structure and organisation and attack that perhaps we didn't have. And, when I go back to the interview I did with Mark, and Mark was very keen not to get drawn on the whole question of season before. We saw that the scrum was an issue. He brought in Rob Webber. That sorted itself out. Last season, we were criticising the attack lines and the depth of attack and everything. You bring in the new attack coach. Is that because you identified he was very keen not to do that for two reasons? I think one, because he didn't want to diminish Kevin Sorrell and what Kevin Sorrell had given to the club over the years. But two, I think he was very keen not to be critical in any way whatsoever. But we saw an improvement in the attack. Now, his name comes up again. Having someone of the quality of Owen Farrell, who reads the game as well as Owen Farrell, will improve any attack. We saw it with the British Lions in Australia. You see it with Saracens in this game. And I saw it when I went down in training and watched him outside Fergusburg. Two things happened. One, Owen Farrell reads the game better than any other player currently playing the game in world rugby. And I include the likes of Bowden Barrett and players like that in that conversation. But secondly, what it also did was it took so much pressure off the Fergus Burke, who didn't have to make structural decisions, and he was able to play what was in front of him. and he played what was in front of him beautifully. Space opened up. He often was the person who was taking the second pivot, as it were, because Owen stepped in that standoff and brought the players in, and then Fergus was sat there with an open field in front of him. And we scored some wonderful tries, a really, really wonderful tries. I think Brandon's try at the corner there was, I mean, you said it, didn't you, Sam? They said, a bit early for try of the season, and then suddenly we put another one in the second half as well.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to what you said about Mikulov and winning that period, it was a 20-minute period for a start. But I would say, what a good rule change, wasn't it? Because it deserved a card. It was very dangerous, but it was clumsy more than anything else. And that 20-minute penalty that we got was appropriate for the crime, wasn't it? And it didn't ruin the whole game. And before last season, it would have been a straight red. We're down to 14 for the whole game, and that would have been too much.
I'm still out about this. I think at the end of the day, if you've got a law in place and it says this is this, if you don't want to get red card, just don't do the offence. Intent only ever really gets taken into account when it comes to disciplinary afterwards. And also, what I've always said is that red cards don't ruin games. They change the dynamics of games.
Well, I disagree with you.
Well, no. It doesn't ruin a game. It changes the dynamic. It means one team has got to do something different.
So it ruins a game.
No, in your opinion, maybe.
Yeah.
For me, it's different, but it doesn't ruin it. It changes it.
Whether it does or whether it doesn't, when you look at that incident at full speed, at the proper speed, these things, you get these accidents in rugby. Yes, you've got to have a punishment that encourages rugby players not to have them, but you're still going to have accidents. And I thought it was a better punishment than in being out after 5 minutes for the whole game. I really did. The two games at the weekends had something in common, and it was hard to choose who put in the better defensive performance, Alex, whether it was the Saracens men or the England women, because they were both amazing in defence, weren't they?
Saracens men probably did slightly better in terms of just England kind of didn't necessarily have the attack that we've seen in previous games, whereas Newcastle probably brought that a little bit more. They had the home advantage. They were kind of ready for this new season. We saw that with how quickly they started. And Canada did something similar, but I just think they didn't have the kind of team to keep going and keep sustaining that, whereas Newcastle had that a little bit better.
And we were down to 14 men for a quarter of the game. So to put in that defensive performance in that time, as you said, Jez, is absolutely right. And also what you said was right, was there was some great attacking tries. I thought especially the Andy Onyama Christie one, which involved a very flat pass for Moen Farrell. Fergus Burke was freed up by having this colossus beside him.
Yeah, and I think, look, we can tie a few of those bits and pieces together. First and foremost, what I will say is when it comes to defence, I think a lot of people, everyone talks about line speed, but what people forget is you can't have line speed unless you're an organised line, because if you're a dog leg, then line speed actually works against you. So the fact that we have that organisation, and I do believe that Farrell played an instrumental part in that, helped us dominate that defence a hell of a lot more. So I put a lot into that.
There was one moment where Newcastle in the first half, I think it was the first half, were on the 5 metre line. They'd got a couple of moves going over it, and you suddenly saw Owen come sprinting out. And you're right, he could have caused a dogleg that would have opened up. But what you saw was the loose forwards, as it were, off of that ruck, read what Owen was going to be doing, and they filled in that gap. And it wasn't a straight line, it was a curved line. But Owen coming out, cut off the pass, forced the player to take the move on, and by which time the players, it might have been Andy Onyama Christie or Harry Wilson, who had a fantastic game, they stepped up into that gap and filled it because they knew what Owen was going to do, because Owen had read it, and they filled in. Fantastic, brilliant. Cut every option down, and I think we actually got a turnover from it as well.
I do think it was quite ironic, actually, that out of all the players on the pitch, the one that looked like he'd been dusted up the most at the end of the game was Farrell, because I think he went there and he needed to show that he was back and he was physically able. I mean, he looked bigger, didn't he? Was it just me? Or did he look like he put on a bit of timber, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, because he's never been like the sprinter type player. But I think you're right, Jez. He read that line really well, and it was because of the organisation of the team. to know that they would go with those players. And I think certainly that organisation, and you mentioned it earlier on, lifting that weight a little bit from Fergus Burke's shoulders. And quite rightly, Jez, you said as well, the fact that the two could work interchangeably at first and second receiver, it meant that when we needed a little bit of dynamism closer to the ruck, maybe a quick inside ball or something like that, Fergus Burke's going to be a little bit better at that. He can jinx around a little bit, create a bit of space. Farrell can act as the pivot and play in someone like Tompkins, who had a phenomenal game. Or we can play it a little bit more where we can switch them up when there's a bit of space wide, because we know that you've got the jinxing feet and the good running lines that Fergus can play slightly wider with a little bit more space. The two of them playing together actually worked incredibly well, I think. You know what? I'm going to say this early doors. I'm one for my early predictions. I actually think the dynamic of seeing Johnson and Farrell together might end up being better, because I really like Louis Johnson. I think he's hugely underrated, and he didn't get as much game time as I wanted him to last year. So I'm quite excited by that. But I think Van Zyl had a better game as well, because of the fact that he had two men outside him that were working so well together. So it goes all the way through the team. And it is amazing. I know we've just said at the beginning we didn't want to put all the pressure on Farrell, but I think just having that calming influence, the expertise that he has in so many different areas of the game, and the fact that he isn't the showman, he doesn't need to be front and centre. He's quite happy to take the hit in the little passes. I think that's what we were missing last year, and we saw it. And yeah, okay, a bit against a declining Red Bulls team throughout the game. I was happy with what I saw as a start to the season, with so many players still to come back.
I wonder if that extra timber is yet another indication that this season he's a 12. You know, he's not going to be offloading before the hit as much. He's going to be receiving and taking the hit more, and he's put on that extra poundage for it. But I think the bloody nose that he got, and he did look like he'd been in the wars, was friendly fire, wasn't it? I don't know who did it to him, but it wasn't a Newcastle player.
Was I the only one that saw that maybe he'd broken it and he kind of put it back in place?
Oh, blimey.
They sort of went to look at him, and then they saw what he was about to do, and the camera moved away. And I felt like he was about to go.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Like Kieran Mounted, or whatever he's now, I can never pronounce his name, for Bristol yesterday, where he dislocated his finger and then immediately got it put back in, went and got a line out and threw a pass out like it was perfect. I mean, we're a different breed, rugby players, aren't we?
There was that England football captain who used to put his shoulder back in. Who was he? The Man United player?
Brian Robson.
That's it. He was a tough one as well. But one big bit of icing on the cake in that game, because Brandon Jackson started, mainly because of injuries to all of our other numerous wingers like Angus Hall and Tobias Elliott. He had a really good game. Really unlucky a great try, as you said, but there was lots of other really good things that he was doing. There was one of the tries was a break from Fergus Burke and then a break from Brandon Jackson. It was really good. Very unlucky to get a knock on the head, but on comes a giant who's 3 days into his 19th year and then does that. Chases a kick, kicks it over one player, bit of a bounce, reaches up about 43 feet to gather it, and then a swallow dive in the end that Chris Ashton would have thought was a pretty good one, Jez.
Oh, well, talk about making a rod for your own back, coming on your debut and scoring a worldie like that. I mean, that's ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, if they wrote that in a Roy of the Rovers rugby version, then nobody would have believed it, would they? But I mean, wow, fantastic. And I mean, I think I made the comment on WhatsApp and said he's going to be one hell of a player when he's fully grown, isn't he?
When was the last time that we had, because I was thinking about this after the game, I can't think of another player going back to maybe someone like Nathan Earl, where we had a sort of a bigger player on the wing. Because we've always had like the Chris Wileses and all right, Chris Ashton's not exactly tiny, but he was a bigger but stockier kind of. Like, when was the last time we had, and Jackson as well, we had two wingers that were of that kind of stature and size. I quite like it myself.
Dan Luger was quite a chunkier lad when he was with us, but he was nowhere near that sort of size. I mean, 6'4" and 18 stone. I mean, I was told I was too small to play number 8 at 6'1" and 18 stone. So I mean, 30 years ago, these boys are playing in the pack and with the pace they've got. I've said it about a number of players. A player coming on with that kind of impact, he's got two ways of going. He's set a bar very, very high, but he's at the right club for it to be looked after. And, I'm sure that if he's got a little bit big for his boots, there's a couple of lads that will be turning around in training on Monday morning, a little brought him back a bit back down to earth and everything. And he certainly, if you saw the video of them doing a tiki-tonga in the dressing room, he sort of like was a bit lost there, wasn't he, Alex?
Something he'll get used to, kind of as a winger. You do tend to score tries, and therefore that gets you in the middle. But otherwise, I think he had a really good game.
In the interview afterwards, I think it was quite pointed from Mark McCall saying that he's in the right team to learn how to play. So, after he's come on and scored a try like that, I think he might have a few clues as to how to play already, I think, but it was definitely the right thing for the director of rugby to say.
The one thing to say about him is it's something that I picked up yesterday watching the TNT coverage of Bristol versus Leicester when they were blowing smoke up the bums of the various wingers on the field, which is all well and good if you're Adam Radwan or Obajimbi or whatever his name is. I can't ever pronounce his name.
That's my job, by the way.
Yeah, they're a great attack, but the defences yesterday for Bristol and Leicester were awful. And, Noah wasn't really tested in defence. No. So that's going to be the big ask for him. And that's when we can really make a decision on where he is at in his career at the moment, is when he comes up against an Adam Radwan or a Louis Rees-Sammet or a Christian Wade, for argument's sake, or some of these try poachers, speed merchants. How does he deal with those guys? And that'll be the big test for him. But at the moment, there's potential there. And if he's 6'4" and 18 stone, provided he can turn, and he looks like he can because he's got some pace about him, then there's no reason to say he won't be a great defending player as well, which is you have to have both courts.
Cockasinga's a right old giant, isn't he? But is he known for his tackling?
Not really.
Not really, no. I mean, the thing is, if you're 1-on-1 or you've got a 2-on-1 on you, as a winger, you take the man who's carrying the ball. Simple as. And if they put the pass in and scored a try out wide, well, they put the pass in and scored a try out wide. That ain't your fault, but you've got to stop it. The one thing I don't want to see from a winger, which you do see too often, is that they go for the space in the middle.
Yeah.
And Noah's going to be a top quality winger. You pick a man, you take the man. And if they score, they score. Well, that's not your fault as long as you take your man and made that right decision. So hopefully that's what we'll see when he gets put under pressure in those situations, which will happen in his career.
Well, I think you learn from experience, don't you? I think the 13 and the winger channel defensively can be quite difficult because a lot of the time you are covering maybe a little bit more space than other channels would do. And I believe it's over time. We've sort of seen Seguin, when Seguin first burst onto the scene, he was running riot. He was getting hold of the ball and he was going through gaps that weren't there, but his defence was absolutely abysmal. And he's become player that he is now that we all, hoped that he would be. I think a lot of it is down to his defensive positioning because we can rely on him in defence. Some of his tracking back, some of his tackling, even on Friday night, he made some excellent try-saving tackles at times. And I think someone like Noah's going to learn that through experience. Yes, you can do it on the training paddock, but like you've said, Jez, when you come up against some of these experienced people, then that's when you learn your trade. And he's got to do that. But we can drip feed it in because we've got a lot of strength in depth in that position.
I hope he does get the experience because another one who was injured is Jack Bracken, and you count up all the wingers we've got. I very much hope he does get the experience. But Jez.
Well, what I wanted to say as well, though, is while we're talking about the back three, one player who didn't really get an awful lot of mentions in the game, though he should have done. When I interviewed Mark McCall, Mark was very keen to talk about why he'd brought Max Malins back to the club, why when the opportunity came to sign him, they signed him. And I think in that game, we saw exactly why. Goodbye, Alex Goose. The king is dead. Long live the king. Max played very similar ways to what Alex does in the past. And I did jokingly say that Alex probably looks at it thinking he's picked the wrong season to retire. He had another season behind all of these players. He'd have liked it. But Max Malins was given space and he exploited space every time. And bar one small mistake, I think, under pressure, he had a really phenomenally good game. And it's lovely to see Max, A, fit, B, playing at the same level he did Russ when he left in that first season he had at Bristol as well.
Let's hope he can stay fit, because that's the issue with Max, isn't he? A wonderful player. If he can stay fit and if he can link up in the way they did with Elliot Daly and Owen Farrell before, then, we're in for a treat. Should we have a look at the 3-word reviews?
Yeah.
So first up, we've got Rugby Saracens at Rugby Saracens. Solid, positive starts. There's no arguing with that. Steve at Saracen 1971. I think this is meant to be, oh, Noah Kalori, which is heaping pressure on the lad, if that's the intention, by giving him Maro Itoji's song. I think let's see whether he lives up to that. Fine Wines at John Hammond. Future looks bright. I think with all the youngsters that we've got, it certainly does. And then James Logan at Journo JLO. Noah Kalori Waldy. I think that's meant to be Worldy. I think you're missing an R there, James, but we'll do it. Oliver Archer at Trombiker, more to come. Very much hope so, although half of me wants the season to end now as we're top of the table. Gareth Baxter, solid-looking scrum. I mean, that's what you picked up before, Jez. I mean, it's just a turnaround, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, everything seems to be working wonderfully fine at the moment. We put the Newcastle front row on toast.
Yeah.
They couldn't cope. We painted a picture, and I mean, I've got a lot of admiration for Reece Carey, who I think has been a very unsung player. But Marco Riccioli, again, he hasn't been training a lot. He said he wasn't training when I went down and came out and had a quick chat with him. But Alec Cleary came on, did brilliantly well. Ian Clark replacing Theo Dan. And then talking about big lads who are going to be some fine specimens when they're fully grown up. Sadiki Blanking heck. He is an absolute colossus, isn't he? I mean,
he can't score a try under the post because he'll knock himself out.
Well, he will do. I mean, honestly, if he gets up ahead of pace, I mean, there's no stopping him, is there? I mean, he'll take a baseball bat to his knees. I think that's the only way you're going to stop him. But
if anyone that does a high tackle in, they deserve to get sent off.
They deserve to get a medal.
They just won the high jump.
But I do want to go back and just mention, I don't know where, Alex, you feel this is so. Another player bit in the, shall we say, not the journeyman category, but workman, Harry Wilson came on when Nathan Michelot was carded. And he did everything. In defence, he was outstanding. But his link play, some of the little passes and offloads he was doing were absolutely outstanding. What a brilliant performance, Alex.
I think he came on, he's, obviously earlier than expected, was like, okay, I've got a point through, I've got more time to kind of show what I'm about and show that I could be a starter. Or if not, I definitely deserve a place on the bench. And I think he just had a great performance.
I mentioned it on the group, didn't I, about Harry Wilson, but we've already put all the superlatives out. I'm going to add something to that, which is that I think that one of the things we might have been lacking last season was I feel like the fringe players didn't step up as often as they might normally do in a recent Saracens squad. And there seems to be pre-season a little bit of additional camaraderie. A few players like Maiden's coming back and Faz coming back. It's the old Saracens way, kind of gluing everyone back together. And I think as much as I want to give Harry himself individually some points, because I said in the group, I thought he'd come on and add a storm. I did the stuff that no one likes to do a lot of the time, just diving on balls and whatnot. I think it highlights maybe that we could be seeing a return to that where, players that maybe if they were going and playing for a Newcastle or Bristol or whoever, they might not have these sensational games, or they'll come on and you wouldn't even notice they were there. Saracens in the last decade or so have had this way of taking a player from the Championship and they'll come in and they'll just throw an amazing performance together off the bench when they weren't meant to be there or whatever it might be. And maybe that was what Harry did, and maybe without that togetherness that maybe we saw a bit lacking last season, that performance might not have been there.
It's another season on for him, and I think that there's something. I'll just go on to Gareth Baxter's second 3-word review, which is 10, 12, 13. Now, that's the only comment that comes close to mentioning the man of the match, Nick Tompkins. I think he's right to pick out 10, 12 and 13. The way that they worked together was brilliant. Nick Tompkins, in his interview, said He was essentially asked, it looked like a Sarries of old, didn't it? And it did. And he said it's all down to mentality.
Yeah. And the other thing with Nick as well is that I think he's benefited from having a rest. He looks refreshed. He looks revitalised. He looks recharged. And we've been saying it for a long time about Nick Tompkins, that we think he's been running on fumes. And all credit to the lad, that every time he puts the boots on, he puts a shirt on, he never gives you less than his very best. But if you're absolutely shattered and you've done nothing but play rugby for 10 years, it comes harder and harder and harder. And yet he's only 30 years old. He's not an old boy, but he's stretched imagination. But he's obviously had a bit of time. He's laid on a sun lounger somewhere for a couple of weeks, and it's made all the difference to him. And, when we're talking about players, Mark was very critical or implied criticism of the way that the structure is, that he can't pick Jamie George and Maro Itoje and Ben Earl because of the fact they were on British Lions tour duty and now they're in the England squad. He is right, but sometimes giving those players a rest, Saracens will benefit of Maro Itoje having 3 weeks off before he plays, particularly if you've got the squad that can cope with him not being there. When you bring those players back in and have had a decent rest, then it proves that the idea of having a rest, albeit that perhaps the season could be better arranged so that everybody has a rest at the same time and they're not playing proper games. But that shows in Nick Tompkins exactly the benefit of that 2 weeks in Dubai in the sun, having a couple of salmon miguels or whatever.
He's done a reverse Hercules. I think that's the right character, is he? He's cut his hair off and got stronger. But
Samson. But
Samson, that's the one.
All Greek to me, mate.
Thank you, Sam. I knew you were here for some reason.
I know. I knew I was here for some reason too. I might as well just nod off now.
I didn't realise it was your knowledge of the Bible, though, Sam. To be perfectly honest.
I was going to say, I think it's actually, they talk about the resting. We are in a position this season a little bit more so maybe that we were last season to be able to do that. You mentioned earlier on the good news that Lozowski is going to be back soon, who I'm just the biggest fan of, Alex Lozowski. I think he does a lot of stuff that no one even bothers thinking about, and he does it really, really well. How good is that the weekend? We've already mentioned like Louis Johnson potentially coming in. Thought Charlie Bracken coming off the bench at 9 looked really good. We've already mentioned all the great options we've got on the wings. We've got Daly to come back to flip around with Malins at the back. Actually, in the centres,
Theo McFarlane.
I was talking more about the backs, the important ones. And Jez is giving me evils now. But, it's actually quite nice to have a little bit where we can change the way that we play, considering the team that we are going to go up against. And having Lozowski coming back, different player to, someone like Tompkins playing at 13. I've never really been the biggest fan of Tompkins at 13, but he played really, really well there. But then Farrell can come off, Tompkins can move in, Lozowski can go at 30. We can move the game, we can move things around during the game as well if things aren't going to plan, which I don't feel that we had those options last year.
Mark McCall is right about the structure of the season and losing the key games. And the key game is going to be, again, if we get there, we'll play all of our stars at Tottenham. And then we have to rest a lot of them for 2 games in that period. And if we have a European game against the likes of Toulon, where we don't have any England players available, then those players you've been talking about who are going to come off the bench are going to be absolutely critical as to whether we are capable of doing anything in Europe. But we better crack on. And Josh Miller, 1992, said it was a Springbok-like performance. So it was the first game of the season. There was a chance we're getting carried away there with that, but it was encouraging. And Coldmore Bill, normal service resumed. So perhaps moving on, looking forward to next week, we've got Bristol on Saturday, and we were watching the Bristol Tigers game, which you had a lot to say about the defence, but I thought it was a cracking game, a really, really good game, and I really enjoyed it. And I think we will know a lot more about ourselves after next Saturday than we do after last Friday, Alex.
When you're facing the top teams that are about your level in the first few games of the season, that's really crucial to see how you can progress and kind of what work you need to do whilst we've still not necessarily got all the internationals back. And actually, if a younger, less experienced squad can stand up to those teams, then we've got nothing to worry about, because then you've got more experienced players coming back who will only improve the side.
Don't want this to sound nasty. One encouraging thing was that Bristol had a whole crop of really crucial injuries there. Ibatoye, Jez,
Yep.
the name?
Yeah,
Ibatoye.
that's why I don't work on commentary, Duncan. I've never been asked to be a co-commentator for TNT for obvious reasons. But
Wasabi had another good game for Exeter, by the way. Harry Randall was injured. Their number 10, McGinty, so they've lost their first choice 9 and 10. And the real killer for me, Luatua was having a storming game for Bristol, wasn't he? And they've lost all those 4. So should we be encouraged, Sam, or is that just a little bit lulling us into a false sense of security?
I'm always on the back foot when making predictions about Saracens. I always say to people, I was there when we lost at home to London Scottish, so I'm never going to get ahead of myself too much. But I was one of the reasons I think watching both of those games, but us against Newcastle and then the Bristol game was, like Jez said, yeah, I think attack won on that day, obviously, and Leicester were a little bit at 6s and 7s at certain points. We can have the same level of intensity and organisation in our defence. What's going to happen, I think Mark McCall will be hoping, is that we'll frustrate the hell out of Bristol because they won't be able to play the game they want to play. And we see time and time again, when Bristol are let off the leash, they are unstoppable. They throw the ball around better than any team in this division. And, they're the Harlem Globetrotters. They've taken over from Quins. They're the Harlem Globetrotters of this division. But if you starve them of that space, they are going to get very frustrated very quickly. We're going to start seeing niggles. We're going to start seeing pushing around. I think Saracens are hoping that there's going to be a punch-up in the first 5 minutes because that will just hand the game to us. We've shown in the first game we are here for a bit of dog this year, and I'm all for it. And I reckon we should turn up at StoneX. We should put some proper big knots over on those little Bristol boys, send them packing back to the Somerset or wherever the hell they're from. And enjoy a nice glass of cider afterwards to toast to our victory. And there we go. There's me signing off.
Well, they've got a few big ones left. That centre with the mullet's not small, is he? But he's actually cut his mullet off to get married, I gather. But it's going to be a cracking afternoon, Jez, I think.
undoubtedly so. I mean, I have an affinity with Bristol, having spent some time living down there. Great club, great owner. I wish them all the best of luck, but not on Saturday, when obviously, I agree with Sam. I think this is going to be a pragmatic season, which the purists will turn around and say, boring Saracens again. But as Barry said on our WhatsApp group, we don't care. We are the pride of North London. We are the original club of North London. And I mean, this is something actually that we are doing, isn't it? Suddenly, all of a sudden, we've stopped being apologetic. We've stopped trying to be everybody's best mate. And we've actually turned around and said, we're Saracens. It's the Millwall attitude, which sticks in my throat being a West Ham fan, obviously. But we're Saracens. Nobody likes us. We don't care. We're pride of North London, and long may it continue. And if that means we go out and beat up Bristol on Saturday, and that's the game we play, nobody remembers our games that won 15 years in the future. They just look in the record books and see what the score is.
Well, I was just about to come on to that point, because you go down to the StoneX and you look at the stands, and there are 4 words written on each stand. One of them's humility, the other 2 I can't remember, and one of them is respect. This is the core of Saracens, apparently, respect. So is it respectful, Sam, to put out a social media clip saying Red Bull doesn't always get you wins, and then show a big jackboot smashing a Red Bull can?
I loved that post so much. You can only tap the heart button once, apparently, but otherwise I would have been tapping it a lot. Look, we all know that we love a bit of banter in games of rugby, and when we were just talking just off air about other people, other sports opinions of us as players, fans, whatever it might be, we all know that in rugby, the more you take the nick out of somebody else, actually, the more respect you're showing them. And because it shows that you like them, you don't talk to the people you don't like. And I think us doing that, they would have taken that. And actually, I think the marketing team at Newcastle would have found that quite amusing. We've done things in the past with Bristol, haven't we, that have gone down incredibly well. I love this kind of mentality of banging our chest. And maybe it fits in. It actually fits in with the style of play that we've got. We are being, like I said, we've got a bit of dog in us this year by the looks of things. And we've been missing that a little bit, losing using scrums. We won a scrum on Friday with only 7 men in it, and Willis playing flanker, against an eight-man pack. I love it. I think it's great. And look, if it all comes back to bite us on the arse, who cares? Like, we've given it a go, and we're being unapologetic in that, and I think that's great.
I totally agree with you. I loved it.
Probably Rory McIlroy won't agree with you about, people talking to you and everything like that. And I think that American who threw the pint at his missus is lucky he did not get a 7-9 wrapped around his back of his head, because he said he would have done it if it would be my wife. But the second thing is, yeah, you're right, absolutely. Respect comes in very many different ways. Saracens earned the right to put that video out after the game. They respected Newcastle. They went to the game and they respected their opposition, and they beat them. And yeah, fair enough. Once you've done that, you've got the bragging rights. And Newcastle would have done the same to us. And wherever you go now, I think it's great. It's all about attracting new people to it and getting people talking. There's no such thing as bad publicity.
I totally agree with you. I mean, we've been stuck at an attendance at the StoneX of about 10,000 for eons now, and something has got to be tried to try and break through that glass ceiling. And it goes hand in hand. Jim Hamilton has been banging on about the fact that rugby has been too apologetic about its brutality. And it needs to play up its brutality. This kind of marketing that the new Broom are going in for, I think, goes hand in hand with that. There was another clip before the game of Andy Onyema Christie effing and blinding a bit. And so there's definitely a new image being projected that is in tune with what's going on across the game. I think very much in contrast to the women's game, Alex, because the World Cup has all been about fun and fluffy cowboy hats and women and, if you like, love in a way. And I think that's quite good to have these two different approaches for the two different arms of the games that are quite distinct.
Yeah, I think the women's game especially is looking like we're not just trying to convert fans who are just fans of men's rugby to women's rugby. Actually, we're trying to build a new fan base. We're trying to tap into families, into women, into teenagers. And how can we bring a new fan base in to make sure this is sustainable going forward? And actually, you can have different teams of marketing. And Saracens can pull into that of going, for the men, we're going to go something we're showing we're really physical, we're really dominant. Actually, for the women, we're going something slightly different. Yes, we're still a physical, dominant top side, but also we'll play into that more fun, friendly kind of style and, have those two work well together. And that's going to bring in more fans because people like different things.
That's totally right. I mean, it's been the huge success of the World Cup. It's been so focused on women, hasn't it? But shall we take a break there and we'll come back to discuss England's triumph?
Hey, it's Charlie Hodgson and you are listening to the Fezcasts.
This is the Fezcast.
So we're back to discuss England being top of the world. Alex, the second highest crowd for any World Cup final ever. What was it like being there?
It was incredible. And, I went for both games. And even from before the bronze final, people were getting in their seats. They were getting excited about it. You could see kind of people had signs and people were really up for it. Because I think one of the things that we're worried about is actually how do you get people to attend the bronze final? It's relatively early, the 12:30 kickoff. But actually, people didn't care. They just made a whole day of them. Like, we're going to go. We're going to support all the teams. And actually, it was a really good atmosphere.
We got a message from Matt. We thought it might be in a kidnap code, but he did say we need to give a shout out to Yarm Swifts Rugby Club, who presumably threw a few lagers down his neck and everything on Saturday. But yeah, it did seem, watching on the television, that it was just a huge party, Alex. And for it to be a party, the game had to live up to the billing, to the party atmosphere, and it did. It was just seemed like England won the World Cup, but rugby union, the game, and particularly women's rugby union, was the hugest victor in that whole game.
You saw it with anyone who even got close to the line. People getting excited that there might be a try. A French rugby club kind of sat a few rows in front of me, and they were really getting invited into the Canadian team. And you had people who, hadn't necessarily been to a game before, but yeah, just got really excited and really started on the atmosphere because you had good tries. You had kind of a bit of back and forth, the Canada scoring first and England scoring. And it wasn't just like England came out and they were dominant, but there were also times where you're like, oh, Canada could do something here. They were still being competitive, and I think that what made it a really good match.
I think the important thing is that now everybody learns from this, in so much as that England have thrown a huge amount of investment, and we will criticise English rugby and the powers that be in English rugby to the ends of the earth, and quite often they deserve it. But on this, they got it one bang on. And all the rest of the countries now need to look at what England have done. And I think Scotland have begun to do it. Ireland have done it because, I mean, Ireland's were a referee's decision or two away from being in a semi-final against England. France, up the games or whatever. They now need to invest to compete. And even New Zealand came here and they threw Wayne Smith at their last one because it was a home one. But they need to invest, and they need to now find the next group of coaches that have to be women as well coming through. You've got the women players. Now you've got to be promoting the likes of Sarah Hunter. Marley Packer's going to be at the end of her playing career now. She's got to be coming into coaching somewhere. And these players, you know, Alex Matthews, her fourth World Cup, she's got to be going into coaching. They've got to take this, unlike the England rugby in 2003 when we won the Men's World Cup and didn't really build on it and made so many different mistakes. They've done so good with this World Cup. The right result happened because of everything that was put in, the investment England put in. Nobody would have complained if Canada had won. They did brilliantly. But Canada had to crowdfund their way there, and they've got to learn from that now. And someone's got to find the money and say, right, let's get these players professional. Let's make sure the Canadian League is professional. Let's make sure the French League is professional. Let's make sure the Irish League is professional. Let's have a competition which brings all the club sides together in a Champions Cup and really build on this, because, I mean, the worst thing that could happen now is next year it fizzles out and we're playing Six Nations games in front of 20,000 people instead of playing every game at Twickenham, because I think now the groundswell is there that home international should, for these Six Nations, should be played at Murrayfield, should be played at the Principality Stadium, should be played at Lansdowne Road, should be played at Twickenham, should be played at Stade Francais.
There's a very important point you made at the beginning there, because we like to knock the RFU, and goodness knows they deserve it most of the time. But that £10 million a year that they put into the women's game is why we've ended up with this huge success. Plus, clubs like Saracens and Lucy Ray in particular. We were groundbreaking in this area with the resource that we put into the women's game as well. And others have followed on from us to the point where we've got the best league in the world. And in terms of going forward, a real litmus test is going to be the Saracens versus Harlequins game, because you've got Ellie Kildunn, you've got Jess Breach, you've got Zoe Harrison, you've got Sophie de Goody, the World Player of the Year. And we, to blow our own trumpets, we've been saying for years, this women's game is really good. These women are really good. Everybody should watch it. And despite the fact that what Alex says is right, that they're trying to create a new audience, there are about 3,000 to 4,000 men's season ticket holders and 200 women's season ticket holders. And for 50 quid, all of those men's season ticket holders could get a women's season ticket. Now that's one game for me in the posh seats, and even in the pauper seats, it's only 2 games. Men's games, the cost of that, you can get a blinking season ticket, and still most people don't go. And hopefully now they realise just what they've been missing out on.
Yeah. Well, the exposure's there, that the games were played, on BBC and it wasn't behind, a paywall and all that kind of stuff, which I think was really, really important for this tournament. But let's not forget, in very recent history, there's been a bit of a litmus test, or there's been not a litmus test, a platform that we can build on, which is we've seen it in the women's football. The Euros being won 4 years ago, whatever it was, and then again recently. And what the women's game in England, how that's evolved, that's a very, very, very clear path that the women's rugby can take. And, playing games in different parts of the country, actually, I agree with Jez. I think the big games, we need them at Twickenham. We want to really push to get the sellouts. Taking them up to St James's Park, taking them to wherever, Sunderland or wherever they played in different parts, Villa Park, wherever, and exposing the country to these players. I mean, God, how brilliant would it be if one day we could have a Champions Cup of women's rugby? That would be absolutely astonishing. But in the meantime, we've got to do, Duncan says we've got a massive, massive, massive club game, which is basically an international game, being played in a matter of weeks. And it will be so interesting to see how well that's attended. And I'm praying that we get an absolutely stonking attendance because look, these girls, we've been saying it, haven't we, for ages, they play at such an intensity and they play to such a high level that, just 15 years or so ago just didn't exist. And I really, really hope, and I was saying this last season on the 1 or 2 episodes I was on, I was really hoping that this was going to be the step up for the women's game. And everything has happened to allow that to happen. It's now what happens now. And that's all in the arms of, the powers that be to keep promoting, keep putting the money in, because the players will keep playing. They'll keep playing to the high level. And I'm so hopeful that in a few weeks we see a massive attendance for the Quins Sarries game.
I totally agree with you. And I agree. Keep taking them out on the road. Yes, have a Twickenham showcase, but keep getting them out to the likes of Sunderland. Jez?
I think the other important thing as well is the fact that not only are they great players, they are great personalities as well. And we've seen that, as you mentioned, the girls in the football, women's football, the likes of Chloe Kelly and their personalities as much as they are hugely talented athletes. And people like Hannah Bottom and ex of our parish, she's a character and a half, but she's got stardust all over her. And they just got to really pin everything on these. Because I think, Alex, and I'm sure, I can't speak for teenage girls. You can. They are such an inspiration, and it's inspiration on so many different levels, I think. It's not only inspiration to be the best athlete you possibly can be, but also to be proud of who you are, that there are different shapes, there are different genders, there are different fluidities, whatever it may be, but be proud of it. And they've just been beacons of hope in what is at the moment a pretty miserable world in some places, isn't it?
Not every player will want to put loads of stuff out on social media and kind of do table dances and all of that. But actually, if the players are, it's not about stopping that. And you had John Mitchell, joining in with TikToks during the World Cup. And it's about the coaches and the team around it not shying away from that and actually saying, if you want to do that, you can. That's not harming us. So why can't you?
Yeah.
Whereas in the men's game, it's kind of been, we haven't done that, so we won't do it. Whereas in the women's game, they don't have that history, so they can go out and do what they want and say, this is how we're going to do it, and no one's stopping them. And it's great.
I was with a bunch of people last week who are not rugby club followers. They'll watch internationals, they'll watch sport, and they were saying that they were all of the opinion that women's rugby is the best women's spectator sport in the world.
I've got friends who only know really about anything about rugby through me. Actually, they're seeing it pop up on their social media feeds and they're liking it and kind of sharing it. So actually, it's that kind of thing of you need to make it good experience to go and watch, not just on TVs, but to go to the stadiums, because that's how the money's going to come in. That's how the players are going to get paid. So actually, it's about making the entire day an environment. I actually think the Rugby World Cup missed out on a huge opportunity because there probably weren't enough food stalls on there. 5 minutes before England kick off, there's still massive queues at burger vans. Actually, they could have had more food, more merchandise, and they would have made a whole lot of money. So it's about identifying where the potential is and then tapping into that if we really want to make this successful.
Was there an issue with shirts?
Castori cocked up on the shirt.
Someone needs to offer you the job, Alex, because I think you speak an awful lot of sense. Nobody's perfect, are they, at the end of the day? We might be close to it, Duncan, but I think, the important thing is to learn from it. And it's the same as, let's get back to the playing side of it. England developed through this tournament. You would have said at the start of this tournament that England were as developed as they possibly could be. It was a sign of an exceptionally good coach. And I was slightly critical of John Mitchell coming in because I didn't know he was coming from the men's game or whatever, and it was very much smacked of a bit of desperation, like New Zealand did with Wayne Smith. Well, we got to win this. We got to get a male coaching and everything. But I think what he was able to do was to identify through the tournament how things developed. And you got to feel sorry for the likes of on our side of players like May Campbell and Marley Packer, who played one game, but their importance to that England squad And I think Hannah Botman got a little bit of grief for saying, well, you go into training and it's like playing the second best team in the world at training. And it came over as a bit unhumble, shall we say. But she's 100% right because, England could have, if England had 15 injuries the week before against France, they'd have put 15 players on who would have put in the same intensity of performance, I think, on that field. Emma Singh didn't get much game time. She'd have come in and done fine. There's a lot of that throughout that team. I think John Mitchell did really, really well, didn't he, Alex, in gelling it and then making them peak again in exactly the right way in the big game when it really, really mattered.
Yeah, I think the players all said, actually, going to tournament, they knew what games they were likely to play, kind of what his expectations of them were. And it just meant that everyone was happy with their role. It's like, if they weren't happy, they had time to accept that. And it wasn't a surprise every week that, oh, I'm not playing. Because Jessica spoke about that after the last tournament, saying, actually, I thought I was good enough to kind of start more games, play more games, and I didn't get that. Whereas now they're going in, it's like, even if they weren't, they're fringe player, they weren't necessarily making the 23, they knew what their role was and they knew they had an important part in us winning.
England left their best to last, and it's by far and away the best England performance. The one position within the England team that I think there was a bit of jeopardy about who was going to play was fly half. And Holly Aitchison, every time she played, had a magnificent game. But I've got to say, Zoe Harrison saved her best for last as well, didn't she? She was absolutely superb in that game.
Holly was a bit disadvantaged being injured at the start of the tournament. She didn't necessarily have that time to show pace. But I think, Zoe had an incredible game. And it was that kind of management. Like, Holly has very good distribution, but she doesn't necessarily have that kicking game, and there was a bit of, if people were a bit unsure about the weather, it might have been raining. And actually, I think Zoe has a better all-round game. And she really excelled in the final.
Yeah, definitely.
Did she miss a kick? She didn't miss a kick, did she?
I don't think she did, actually. I mean, the other point to make is as well, though, of course, as well about those fringe players. And it's like what we were saying about Saracens men earlier on. At the end of this tournament, I go back to the old Ed Griffiths story about South Africa in 1995, saying the worst thing he did was not sack all the players. He'd won the tournament in 1995 and let them carry on. Same way, Marley Packer is not going to be playing for England again. I'm sure Marley, in her heart, knows that. But also, Alex Matthews, 4th World Cup. Is she going to turn around and say, do you know what? I've done my bit now. Zoe Aldcroft, she's captain. I mean, is she going to carry on? So then you look at the other players who didn't get the game time, perhaps those other players did, and is going to go, do you know what? Okay, for the next World Cup, I know what World Cup rugby is all about, and they've got that experience. So you've got the next bunch of players coming through. So Abby Cockayne and Lark Atkin-Davis, are they going to be around for the next World Cup? Well, May Campbell probably will be. So she's got that experience, and then they come in and they will get their opportunity. I think that regardless of whether John Mitchell stays on as coach now for the next World Cup or whether it is Sarah Hunt that steps up, which I would love to see, I think these guys who are on the peripheral, who've got 10, 12, 15 caps, know the next World Cup, they'll probably have 40, 50 caps, and they will be the ones that will be the core of that World Cup defence in 4 years' time with other youngsters coming through below them.
Yeah, I think John Mitchell's done really well with bringing 1 or 2 or 3 players in per Six Nations, per WXV. So actually you're slowly integrating the team. So it's not one massive changeover after World Cup. We'll have players like Maddie Fainarty, Abiba to May Campbell who continue that. But then you're slowly bringing in new players, because there are a lot of players who will probably go on for at least another 2 years until the Lions tour, because they'll know if they're not playing for England, they're incredibly unlikely to be selected for that. And then actually you have that slow rotation over the next World Cup cycle. And by the time we get to Australia in 2029, we've got a refreshed team. We've got a new team who are ready to go and defend the title.
Talking of the Saracens aspects as well, there was just one point in the game after the magnificently named Hogan Rochester scored her second try, where you're thinking, oh, this could be a bit interesting. But then Rosie Gallagher came on and suddenly the forwards were dominant again. And she wasn't on for long, but boy, she really brought a steadying influence to the game, and you knew, actually, they're not going to do it.
I mean, I thought Rosie was perhaps unlucky not to get the starting berth, but then again, Tarling had a fantastic tournament. Abby Ward is just class. I mean, that's the beauty of it is, isn't it? That's what every team wants, is the fact that a player comes on from the bench and you see no difference, or even you see an increase in intensity and an increase in performance because they're replacing harder players who've put in a 60-minute performance. Rosie has had a fantastic tournament, and I mean, she really did, as you say, make a big difference at a point when, Canada might have come back into.
Yeah, absolutely.
And her and Sophie de Goody together for Saracens is something to get the mouth watering. And I think we really do need just focusing a little bit on Sophie de Goody. She had a fantastic tournament. Meg Jones, particularly when you hear the stories of her life and losing her mum and dad in the way that she did this year, and nobody would have blamed her if she turned around and said, I need some time away. She got well played of the year, well done. But for us as Saracens, seeing Sophie get it, given that we didn't see an awful lot of her last season, well, with the injuries she's had, she goes back and plays the way she's been playing for Canada as a one-woman cheat code alongside Rosie Gallagher. I mean, we were worried last year, weren't we, Alex, about our line out in the women's game. We just got it sorted, haven't we? And it means Georgia Evans can move back into the back row, which Sam will be happy about, and all those sort of things. I mean, it's a fantastic place to be, isn't it?
It's going to be reminiscent of the old line-outs of George Cruz and Mario Itoje, isn't it? To see those two in the line-out, it's going to be fantastic. So maybe to finish off with, going back to a theme we touched on earlier, there is a women's semi-final at the StoneX on Sunday. Now, there will be many weekends in which there are no men's home game and no women's home game, and maybe one day the two arms of the game will get it together to coordinate the season. But nevertheless, it's a mouth-watering prospect. No internationals, but who are the players that perhaps those who don't follow the women game should look out for next Sunday, Alex?
Louise McMillan, she's been our captain in this campaign. Didn't have much game time last season, but actually she's come in and gone, I've got a point to prove. I'm going to do this. I think also Charlotte Wright-Haley coming back from, long injury layoff. She's come back and, again, had a point trade. I just think you've got players like Louise and like Hella Vivas who didn't get to go to the World Cup. And actually that's been really beneficial for them and Saracens to have them there, to have that experience that other clubs haven't necessarily had.
Yeah.
And Poppy Clear as well, of course.
There's still some big names there. A lot of players that people will see are really exciting to watch in the flesh. So hopefully, as we've discussed, we'll see bigger crowds there. Well, I think we've done that, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure to talk it through. What a great weekend. And let's hope we have another great one next week.
This is the Fezcast.